Did the Walt Disney Corporation put a hit out on Christian Horner? Who is Lando Norris Racing? Welcome to Tinfoil Helmets, your occasional spicy hot take roundup with all the latest F1 rumors, with the almost believable conspiracy theories to back them up. We have researched everything here for hours to make sure it is totally founded in logic, reason, and truth. Or not. Who knows? Dominic, we're back. It's been a summer break. The Olympics were on. So much has happened. Shall we dive right into how many things we got absolutely wrong? Not even like a day after the Belgian Grand Prix finished, our predictions were already shattered for Zandvoort.
They were, and it was very disappointing. I was frustrated by this. I was expecting a lot more spice. So my predictions were a certain Max Verstappen doesn't win in Zandvoort. So I'm going to get a big fat check mark on that, maybe 20% bigger than any other check mark you've ever done. I also said that Perez would be in the V-carb. No. Danny was going to be in the reserve seat. No. Yuki in the Red Bull. No. Liam back on the grid. No. And then George would win on a 4-stop strategy. Definitely not in any way possible did that work out for him.
But he did attempt a 2-stop strategy.
He did attempt it. And he didn't need to and shouldn't have. But before I go into that and complaining about the strategy team at Mercedes, do you have any predictions that you were successful with?
None. None of mine were good at all. Terrible. The Australians over the Dutch in the men's team sprint at the Olympics did not happen. The Dutch were so dominant, which also would have been a perfectly fine prediction. The biggest news there was they actually got third, which is honestly a bit of a step back from them. But there was a whole thing of they took the guy who was in the third position, and for the finals they actually put him in the first position. And then so who knows what team sprint is even anymore, because man 2 and man 3 and man 1 are all a myth, and everybody can do anything, and sprinter's going to sprint.
I need to interject in here that when Andrew explained this to me, it took me a good few minutes to process that when you have a bunch of bicycles going around in a circle, it does make a difference who you start with, who you put in the middle, and who you put at the end. And I would not have expected that. So if you're new to cycling, it is important, and it does make a difference, because when you watch it, you're like, oh, I see what's going on. Especially when the guy at the front is basically built like a human monster because he's the size of a small planet.
Yeah. The Dutch sprint team sprint that won the gold in Paris was actually at Zandvoort today, and they were watching the racing. And I saw an Instagram post of them in front of Lewis Hamilton's pit box. So, goats respecting the goat.
Yeah, luck powering luck.
Yeah, they are by far and away the best team sprint combination that has ever been put together. And if you really disagree with that, just text me, because you know who I am at that point in time if you think that's wrong. And I'll tell you how you're wrong. And then I also had the Australia over Dutch at Zandvoort, thinking Piastri beats Verstappen. Didn't happen. Once again, surprise British riders in the finals.
Did collectively the Australian drivers on the track get enough points to beat Max Verstappen? I don't think they did.
No, because I don't think Daniel was in the points.
Well, yeah, whatever. And what were you saying about the British team there? Sorry,
that they were a surprise in the silver position at the Olympics, and we had a British driver on the front here. So, just all sorts of parallels between that.
It's got wheels, it's got countries, and it's got excitement.
Now all we need is an Australian driver to suddenly switch to a British team, and we'd have everything.
How does that work?
In immediately following Paris, like the Monday after the games, the guy who won 3 medals for Australia, Matthew Richardson, he announced he was changing nationalities to be British. So he's going to ride for Team GB probably in about a year or so after the next Worlds and Continental Championships happen, per the rules. Although the Australian cycling contingent wants him to sit out for 2 years, which is also part of the rules, so this is going to get a little interesting.
I didn't think cycling was that spicy.
But it looks like you only have to sit... when I looked at the rules, you only have to sit out 2 years if this is your second country change, and this is only his first country change. Although technically, because he was British, at some point he did declare to be an Australian, so did that actually count as one? So things get weird. He was born in England. He moved to Australia when he was 9. He raced for Australia at Junior World Championships. So at some point, I guess he declared he was Australian. So since Australia is saying, well, now you're going back to being British, that's 2 national changes. So now you have to sit out the 2 years rather than just the one season.
I hope they've got some good lawyers there.
It's going to get interesting because I imagine if the UCI is like, yeah, no, you can just do the Worlds and Continental Championships, which means he's back in competition in like June. Then yeah, Aussie's going to be a bit pissed about it, and probably
Fascinating.
the Court of Arbitration of Sport will get involved.
Is there one court of arbitration of sport that deals with all sports, or does each sport have their own court of arbitration?
CAS, I believe, deals with everything.
Interesting. So they are really the true power brokers in sports.
Yeah.
Should we turn this back to F1?
Yeah. Danny in the Red Bull, no. Liam in the Racing Bulls, no. Safety car, no. Oh my gosh, we've gone another race without a safety car.
I have a spicy take / rumor on that.
Is it that? Does it have to do with Burt Mylander not needing any more screen time?
No.
Oh. All right, fine.
So, in summary,
yeah,
we are terrible at predicting F1.
Yeah, we're down to almost a quarter of our predictions correct. We're batting .264, which, good news, we're fine to be an everyday player on a baseball team, but we're not an all-star anymore.
Does that mean that we would struggle to be in the best teams?
No, because they're 9 guys. Everybody has to hit once. That's the whole like problem with baseball, if you want to put it that way. Of like one superstar cannot carry a team because even one superstar only bats every 9 times.
Right.
Yeah. So
we're filler at this point.
Yeah, we're a good utility player. I mean, I'm not going to count us out. Depending on the position, we're definitely worth it. We're good for a catcher. If we're a catcher, we're great.
Okay, great. Because I can't catch. I'm very bad at that. So, since we took a month off, because, we just couldn't be asked, there was some drama, and lots of different types of drama. Shall we get started on the longest laundry list of drama that should have been spicy but really wasn't?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, I made a statement that if Perez doesn't get fired, I was going to take up day drinking. And so I've taken up day drinking because he didn't get fired.
Do you have a preferred day drink of choice?
Water. I didn't specifically specify the type of day drinking that I'd be taking up, just that I'd be drinking during the day.
Well, I'm glad you're staying more hydrated now.
Yes, exactly. Hydro homies. Apparently this all came to a head because everybody had basically been told that he was going to get fired, and everybody was like, yes, and they'd even changed some logos on some things and put different faces on it.
And I believe the Dutch Grand Prix app had Max and Daniel as like teammates.
Yes. It's terrible because the FIA and MBS, the non-murderous one, along with the FOM, came in and said...
alleged non-murderous one.
Sorry, alleged non-murderous one. Fair point. Came in and said that if they fired him, basically the Mexican Grand Prix would get cancelled, couldn't happen, there'd be a mutiny, money would be involved, and it was absolutely ridiculous.
Wasn't it also like if the Mexican Grand Prix does happen, you won't make it out alive? There was also some of that. Yes,
exactly. And so apparently his performance has been acceptable, despite the fact that they're only 32 points behind, ahead of McLaren, which is terrible. And I think there's an important point that we talked about in the opening here, related to Disney, because there's more spice involved here. It's not just FOM, apparently.
Yeah, I heard Disney had a little bit of stepping in to do as well, because Checo Perez Don't Give Up was debuting on Disney Plus, Star Plus, depending on your region availability. And it's really not good for viewership if the prime candidate of your documentary series about how great they are and how they never give up has just been dropped by their team and won't be racing anymore for the rest of the season. You really got to read those Disney terms and conditions when you sign up for Disney Plus. Who knows what might be in there?
Yeah, just because Christian Horner one time had subscribed to Disney Plus, he now can't fire Checo Perez because he can't go through a court of arbitration.
He just wanted to binge The Mandalorian on the free trial. He didn't even give a credit card information.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. I do have one other quibble with this. That if you're the team...
With Disney, with the team, with Checo, there's a lot of things to quibble here.
All three. In a holy trinity. If you're going to create a TV series to hype you up, to make you feel good about yourself, and then you're going to have the chutzpah to call it Don't Give Up, should you not think more carefully about that, given that the person the TV show is about gave up at the first race of the season?
I'm sorry, I got lost in your pronunciation of chutzpah.
Sorry, I'm fine. It's not my fault. Sorry. Chutzpah.
There you go.
Chutzpah to name a TV show Don't Give Up about a person who has, by the very definition of it, given up.
Yeah.
So, This continued on throughout the... Well, not continued on. This went silent, and everybody was like, well, that's weird, and there's a lot of... Why would you... It's very confusing. And then we come to the race this weekend, and then despite the great affirmation from the Lord himself, Christian Horner, saying how wonderful and glorious and Checo is, and it's all about his performance. Andy qualifying P5. Basically, everybody says he's lost his seat, and it's going to be Liam, and how Liam's definitely going to be in F1. It's ridiculous. I don't understand what's going on, because this is like, it's bonkers.
Yeah, I definitely heard Liam in a seat. It didn't necessarily specify which seat it was, but Liam in a seat, which definitely implies either Danny's in the Red Bull or Liam's in the Red Bull. Sorry, Yuki.
Yeah. Mr. Helmut Marko said he would be in one of our cars, and then Horner came out the next day and said nothing of the sort. We didn't say that. I don't know what Marco's saying. Maybe we'll lend him out.
To be clear to Helmut Marko, and what Red Bull needs to remember of what his salary is, our cars is Red Bull and Red Bull Racing. Or the Racing Bulls and Red Bull Racing.
Absolutely, but Horner said it couldn't be one of their cars.
Man, this has all gone crazy since Newey has left.
Yeah. Anyway, so yes, Perez craziness that I don't think is done, and I really think he is losing his seat, but nobody wants to talk about it until after Mexico, and they've left the country. So we'll see what happens. So also, Carlos Sainz, the driver who was never sure about which seat he wanted to sit in, made a decision. He's going to Williams on a contract that's long and complete with many performance clauses. And our long sporting nightmare is over, because the rest of the musical chairs can now start to fall, and it will be excellent and amazing. I think this is a great move for Carlos. I think this is a great move for Williams. I honestly think they should fire Logan Sargent and put Carlos in it now, but I don't think Carlos would want to leave Ferrari right now.
Exactly.
So I think this is good. I think this is good for Sainz. I think this is good for everybody. All around, perfect.
Yeah, I was really happy to see him in the Williams. I think Williams is trying to take that step forward. The biggest thing they need right now is somehow to convince Adrian Newey to come build them a car, which would be some wonderful comebacks around of Adrian to finish his career at Williams by getting them back to the top. That would just be the best.
I would love that. I just love the arc of that story. I think it's just a brilliant... they should be... If they sign Adrian and they manage to pull it off, they need to sign the film rights and the documentary rights at the same time.
I really think the best way to get Adrian is with actually team equity.
100%.
Because he's wanted to be a partial owner for a long time.
Yep. I think you should even make him pay for it, because I think he'd pay for it.
Yeah, sure. So. But it's probably a combo deal of salary, and then you have a chance to buy in some equity or something like that. Yeah. Do we have any more Adrian Newey news we want to discuss while we're briefly talking about Adrian?
Adrian Newey has been linked with everybody somewhere at some point, and I'm pretty convinced at this point he has basically playing the game with so much swag and gaslighting everybody. Because we had, what was it in the break? We had definitely signed for Aston Martin, gonna come and get trotted out at Zandvoort. It's over, and he hasn't signed for that. Then we had he's definitely going to Ferrari, and then we were having definitely not going to Ferrari. And then the fact that he showed up on the social medias at a social event wearing a McLaren hat and then looking pensively at the camera. I don't know. He's basically been linked with everybody, and he's the school bicycle of aerodynamic designers.
Just out of curiosity, could he just open up his own Formula One consulting business and just help every team?
I think he, regulatorily speaking, would be able to do that. I don't know if he wants to do that, though.
Oh, I think that'd be great. Is he just drops in and says, "Here's what's wrong with your car," and then drops out. Doesn't really do any massive designs. Just points to the brake ducts and goes, "I would look here. There could be something going on here."
I like the idea of him not saying how to fix it, but pointing out that it was wrong. I like that, because I feel like that fits best within the consulting and the purpose of the sporting regulations. Just, I will point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
But you got to do the hard work. I like that. I think that's a good idea. And he should charge maybe $500,000 for each thing that he points out.
I would think an hour.
Yeah.
That's an hourly rate, yeah.
Yeah. Alpine have decided to hire a child to run the team. And I say that not denigratingly. He's, I think, the youngest team principal on the grid at 36 years old, Mr. Oliver. I've forgotten his surname. His name's Oliver.
Well, to be fair, that did work out very well for Red Bull about 20 years ago.
Who did they hire?
Christian Horner.
Oh, sorry. For some reason, I thought you said McLaren, and my brain was like, what?
No, I said
yes,
Red Bull.
no, that makes sense. Yes, that makes sense.
It happens. I mean, if you got a guy who comes out of a racing program, knows what's going on, and has the drive to do the whole thing, you know, at least some French can exchange power gracefully.
Maybe.
That's a bit of a political statement with what's going on in France right now.
But has it transitioned quietly? Because we also have Flavio in the mix. Does this merely look like a lull in the political climate, or is there something waiting to come? We don't know.
Or is this Flavio thinks that he'll be able to influence a young team principal who doesn't know what he's doing?
Exactly.
And,
important in this context is apparently the team is up for sale, but Flavio says it is not for sale, which I don't really believe because he's lied and cheated on everything. He also says that there are no jobs at risk because apparently the engine team is trying to strike with the suggestion that they're going to move to Mercedes, which I don't really understand what striking will solve for them.
Yeah, they're clearly not working on the engine now.
You're clearly. So, like, what are they going to do? Like, oh, we'll just switch to Mercedes. And like, well, we're going to strike then. I'm like, yeah, but you're building the engine that we don't need anymore. So it doesn't really matter. You can strike for as long as you want.
Well, I have to say this as somebody who is who admires the French work ethic a lot, that there's probably some French employment contract clause that, like, you're not allowed to lay anybody off by going with, like, a different group. So, like, even though you've made them redundant, you can't actually fire them.
You are absolutely correct. There is a whole workers' council, and getting rid of people is very difficult, and it makes absolute perfect sense. But again, to my point, what do they hope to achieve by striking?
It's the French. You never know. One of the best news articles I've ever written or read. That's the word. One of the best news articles I've ever read was around during the global financial crisis, and it was that. So the French, to help their workforce, were like setting up these temporary offices to like help people learn how to do office work. And really, they weren't doing anything but like learning how to file, learning how to send like a fax, things like that. But one of the things on their curriculum was learning how to strike, because it is a core tenet of the French workforce, that they actually learned how to strike when they were in this like government fake work building to try to learn how to become an office worker.
Doesn't the CIA have a manual? Like, I'm being serious. I think the CIA has a manual on how to cause instability in organizations from the inside. I feel like that's if you want to take your learnings as a person learning how to strike, you can take it to the next level by reading the CIA and work out what to do. I think that's a good idea. I highly support it.
If the theme for a previous podcast was hubris, this one is going to be allegedly.
Allegedly. I love that. Yes. Speaking of Alpine, they have hired a new driver to replace Esteban Ocon next year. It is Jack Doohan, Mick Doohan's son, who was third in the F2 Championship last year and hasn't been driving this year. We'll see how this goes. This could be good. This could be bad. I don't know. At least it's not Logan Sargent.
I think the craziest thing in all this is if you get Jack Doohan on the grid, Danny Rick somehow stays on the grid, Oscar Piastri's on the grid, Liam Lawson's on the grid, you have almost a quarter of the grid from Oceania.
It blows my mind. I find that fascinating. I don't understand how that happened.
Like, I understand, like, the three Brits, like, and because British bias, all the teams are based in or in England. I get that, but, like, that's a lot of people from Oceania.
Well, it's even stranger when you think about the fact that when people from Australia talk about getting into racing, one of the things that they constantly talk about, this also applies to Far East drivers too, is for me to be successful and start my journey to F1, I have to leave and they have to come to Europe. And the sheer, maybe Jack Doohan's not the best example because his dad's a famous sports person anyway in MotoGP. But nonetheless, I think overall the sheer weight of what you have to overcome to do that is actually quite significant, which is maybe why most Australian drivers usually aren't terrible.
And also, they have V8 supercars if they don't want to leave.
True, they always have to go back on the more exciting NASCAR. Max was asked during the interviews in the pre-race that since this is his 200th Grand Prix, will he be in F1 for his 400th Grand Prix?
And he said, hell no.
He instantly replied, which I thought was not actually surprising, because if you do the mental math, that would mean he'd be extending his contract past 4 years, past the 2028 termination of his Red Bull contract.
It'd be essentially another 8 years.
Yeah, and I absolutely... Nobody should be surprised by this answer, and anybody who spills newspaper ink on this has not been paying attention for the last year and a half. But it is interesting that in the break, supposedly he got in a DTM car in Mugello and stunned the engineers with his performance. But there were no qualifiers on that. It didn't say whether he was really good at it or really bad at it. It's unclear.
I think the indication would be that he was very good in the DTM car, and he was on the pace very quickly.
Yes, but it was also surprising, given that the opportunity to trot that data out. Question is, was it pre-planned? Because that weird NASCAR guy says that he was way better than Max. What's his name? Kyle Larson?
Yes, Kyle Larson was adamant during the break that he is a better overall driver than Max Verstappen. That Max couldn't win in a NASCAR car, and, well, he would definitely lose to Max in a Formula One car, that if they were in equal equipment, that he would beat. Yeah, I don't know about that.
I love the hubris. To return to a previous episode, this is the hubris that makes America great.
Yeah, I mean, I get why he's saying what he's saying, but, like, man, I don't know. Like, the craziest thing about all this is, like, Max does enough sim racing in, like, other categories. Mm-hmm. Like, all right, Kyle, go hop on iRacing and get in a GT3 car and see how you do against Max and Team Redline.
Yes, exactly.
Like,
it's like the matchup I want is Fernando and Max doing a bit of iRacing competitiveness together. But we'll get that.
Or they go to Daytona and make Kyle shut up.
Also true.
Because Kyle won the Daytona 24 this year, I believe.
That's an oval track, right?
Not for the 24-hour.
Okay, it is the IMSA, whatever it is.
Yeah, with the infield and all. No, the NASCAR race is the Daytona 500. The 24 Hours of Daytona has the infield track.
This is the thing that's flawed with, what is it, the Race of Champions, I think it is, that they don't actually get champions and they don't really put the time and the weight behind it, because I feel there should be a sports car motor racing champion of champions that they run like every 4 years, like maybe offset from the Olympics, and you get them all, you give them all the money, but you give them equal cars, like it's spec series, and you do some ovals and you do some rallying and you do some other ones, but you actually get real people in it and you pay them a lot of money so that you can have like Lewis and Max and Fernando and Seb and whoever all the people are in IndyCar who might be reasonable, etc., etc.
And it's got to be, Mazda MX-5s, because you could rally in that, you could oval in that, you could road course in that.
Okay, I love that idea that it's the same car that you do on all of... I love that, yes,
yeah.
Exactly. And you only get one car. If you break it, you buy it.
I mean, it's a Mazda MX-5. How expensive can they be?
Exactly. So, Liberty Media, the Greek custodians of the Formula One brand, have somehow dug an even bigger hole vis-a-vis Andretti Racing by actually creating an actual antitrust probe from the American DOJ, which seems like a bad idea to trigger. Not that necessarily it will result in any changes, but that feels like quite a big distraction, and especially when the time when the DOJ, FTC, etc. are a bit cranky about antitrust. Maybe they should have thought more carefully about this before saying no.
And if you're doing a lot of cool, fun deals in the Middle East, maybe you don't want your books open to that?
Yes, exactly. That would be very suspicious. I do have a very important question here, though, and I think you, as somebody who is more insight into the world of sport than maybe myself, why isn't this a problem for NFL, NHL, NBA, and MLB?
Because I believe they have an explicit carve-out from antitrust.
And is it written, do you believe that it's written in such a way that it actually names the sports? Because that's what confuses me. Is
yes.
I feel like most laws are written like sports that involve balls, and all F1 needs to do is strap a ball to the top of the car or something, and they'll be fine.
Oh, baseball is subject to antitrust laws, or is not subject to antitrust laws.
Interesting.
Football is...
But has like a consent decree or something that they'd resolved or something?
Well, but also like there have been other football leagues that have popped up in recent years. Like I think the USFL is playing spring ball now. So there are other football leagues outside of...
But that's the thing in this case. It's not saying that all the teams or another league can't start. It's saying that you can't join the current league. And I always feel like there's this big brouhaha about expansion for all of the, the American sports, where it's like, well, you can't just start a team. You got to go buy a team because there's a limited number of them.
Yeah, baseball is carved out from antitrust.
Okay.
So that is one where, yeah.
This is what I find so fascinating, and maybe that's the end game, is that ultimately what happens is they litigate and have a conversation, and they allow Andretti in, but they get some appropriate clauses written into some appropriate legislation.
The Supreme Court in 1922 ruled that Major League Baseball is not considered interstate commerce under the Sherman Antitrust Act.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So that's the case. You end up in situations where so I guess Liberty could go before the Supreme Court and be like, oh, we're not subject to commerce or the Interstate Commerce Act, but this is like the whole thing of if you try to run multiple races in America, you're now subject to interstate commerce.
They should just pick one and stick to it.
Exactly. Chicago.
I like that. That's a good idea.
Or Watkins Glen. Let's do it.
So Bono, the great relationship, the most successful relationship of engineer and driver in the history of F1, apparently doesn't really like Lewis that much, because he decided to take a promotion at Mercedes, which I assume included a very large check, and is not going with him to Ferrari. The other choice is possibly he just doesn't like pasta and doesn't want to move to Italy. The rumor is that he is going to engineer for Kimi Antonelli, but he's also, the promotion is to head of trackside engineering, I believe. And so it's interesting. I was actually kind of surprised by that, but we'll see what happens when he gets Kimi next year.
He does have a really good track record with who he's been race engineers for, though.
Yeah, because he engineered Schumacher, right?
He did.
Michael Schumacher.
Yep.
So it's interesting. Speaking of Kimi Antonelli, he is apparently going to take Lewis's car at Monza. So he's come for his whole, everything. He's come for his engineer and he's come for his car, but only for FP1. And he's been accidentally confirmed by Toto that he will be the 2025 racer side by side with Russell, when he said, I'm going to give both our drivers the best car, and hopefully George and Kimi can do great with it. And you're like, whoops, spilled it.
Well, I think this is because apparently they did have conversations with Max during the summer break, and Max said no.
And Toto apparently is lamenting this, saying that he should have just, if he'd called Joss beforehand, immediately after the crash in Silverstone in 2021, this wouldn't be a problem. And I have two things I think about that, which is if Joss really, really holds such a grudge, that's kind of depressing. But also, really, at this point, is Joss really still running Max? Is he still driving the bus? That just feels weird at this point. Surely he doesn't need to. Max is mature and old enough that he can do what he needs to do.
I mean, I totally agree with you but that goes against everything we also know about Jos Verstappen. True. He is the kind of person that would hold a grudge for 2021. Yeah. He is the kind of person that would still be trying to run Max's career, because he is trying to make Max have the career he was incapable of having on his own.
Living vicariously through his own child, and I feel that is a recipe for later problems in life for both parties.
Yeah, Max seems relatively okay for now. We'll see what happens post Formula One racing. I wonder what how Jos felt about Max saying he's not going to be around for 400 Grand Prix.
At which point, I'm assuming he got beaten by Jos, saying, no, you need to rethink this. You should take that Mercedes seat.
Well, luckily, if he got left at a gas station in the Netherlands today, it's not too far from home.
Exactly. He can always get on a bicycle or call an Uber.
Yeah, pretty much.
Shall we see if people still have jobs in our occasional and very rarely repeated segment, Does Blank Still Have a Job?
Oh my gosh, we're only to that section. Let's do it.
I was going to say Lewis, and I wrote this before it, but I think he did a pretty good job in the race. So I'm going to say Lewis still does have a job. And
I was surprised to see that on the list instead of Sergio Perez, but we've already talked about him enough. But Lewis is doing fine.
He screwed up qualifying.
Yeah, it happens.
But then he ate his Wheaties. I think he did okay.
Yeah, I think he did great. The only thing with Lewis is they're not going to drop him in the last 9 races. They've already disrespected him enough. They're not going to disrespect him even more.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's. But I think it's no, we can just wait him out at this point in time. He's gone. If Lewis wasn't linked to Ferrari, I think there'd be a better question of is Kimi in the car for next year, things like that. Yeah, but we know.
Yeah.
So technically, no, Lewis doesn't have a job with Mercedes anymore. He'll be driving for Ferrari next year.
Ferrari! I'm going to have to get my Ferrari merch and become a Ferrari stan, and I don't have enough hopium to do that. Anyway, speaking of other drivers, beginning with the letter L. Logan! Does Logan still have a job after massively blowing the car up, literally on fire, in free practice and couldn't take part in qualifying? The strong rumours that he will not be in the car for Monza.
I heard the rumor that he might not be in the car for Monza, and I'm like, oh man, that's so he gets a couple more races, and I looked and Monza's next. It's oh, he's gone.
Yeah. The rumor is that it might be
Mick Schumacher.
It might be Mick Schumacher. Apparently, Kimi Antonelli specifically has been ruled out as not getting it. Where Toto said today that Kimi has a practice plan that is set out and running for him for the rest of the season, and he'll continue to stick to that and drive in his existing formula. Which I find interesting if he's supposedly the second coming of Max Verstappen. That really, but nonetheless, I think Logan needs to be half-inched, and I feel bad for Logan, because it keeps just going bad for him. But at this point, he's literally costing the team significant amount of money.
Can't wait to see him in IndyCar next year.
It's going to be great. Speaking of the Williams team and having to work really hard to put the car back together again, maybe the draftsman who drew the things for the car, he might need a new job, or he needs to learn how to use a ruler. Did you see the comment from the Williams team today before the race about the whoopsie where they got disqualified because the floor wasn't right?
Yeah, it was a little too wide, right?
It was a little too wide, and the team was like, we scanned that real good, and we really thought we were in it. But this shows how I think the Williams team is taking the right perspective. It's like, but the FIA said it wasn't, and we have to go work out what we did wrong. There wasn't like, well, the FIA's wrong, and they're a bunch of liars, and they got it in for me. They were like, nope, we must have screwed up somehow. We don't understand how, but we're going to go find out. So,
did you hear how they fixed it?
They ground the edge off.
They literally sanded it down.
Yeah, which means
it was only like 3 mils, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is this paradox that I get stuck with sports. And I understand on one level, like I have split brain on it, which is like, I absolutely understand you have to enforce the rules without negotiation and interpretation, because otherwise everybody just exploits them. But I'm like, 3 millimeters, you're going to disqualify a guy? Like, really? Was it worth it? But I understand it.
I mean, but it's one of those things. So 3 mils, I wonder if it's like the width of the laser level of like, oh, you scan from the inside or the outside and we measure from the inside of the laser line, like sort of stuff.
Yep.
And I definitely agree that, like, 3 mils isn't probably going to make the biggest difference when it comes to it. But at the same point in time, like, if you allow 3 mils, would you allow 4? If you allow 4, would you allow 5?
Exactly.
And it just starts to end up with like, where's the line? Because if you say, like, if anything, then you include like a tolerance of like, it has to be 100 mil or 100 somethings wide plus or minus, and we'll give you like a 3 clearance, but then the rule is like 103. Like, yeah, so
it's ridiculous. Speaking of engineering teams, what about the Red Bull engineering team?
They have one?
Do they have one? Did they all quit, or just counting that they cash out the Red Bull shares? Like, what is going on?
Did you watch the video of Max's onboard that I sent you?
Yes. It is so bad. He just turns it, and it's like full lock, and he didn't over brake into the corner. He's just doing full lock, and the car is like.
If I was playing Forza, and like those tires matched my steering input, I would think there was a bug in the game.
Yes. Because
I'm sure Dominic will post it in story notes or show notes or something like that, because we do post those from time to time. But if you can go find it, there's a video of Max like going through several corners at Zandvoort, and it's just understeer city does not even begin to describe it. It is every input he is making on that car is just non-existent. Like, It doesn't seem to have any front end grip. It just is understeering in ways that apparently it's shifting from lap to lap, so it's not even like you can get used to it. It's just a terrible car.
But here's the really spicy interest. The car that Max was driving this weekend has the same floor as Bahrain. They switched it. Perez has the new floor. This is the floor that was working great at the beginning of the season. So what's happened?
Well, there's more to the car than just the floor.
There is, and I have a theory. And remember how I was on my hobby horse screaming that Mercedes had crappy suspension?
Yes.
I think Red Bull have done the same thing and screwed up the suspension.
There was the whole brake thing that came out during the season that we didn't talk about in between off-season news of.
I forgot about that.
That they apparently had asymmetrical braking, which is not allowed. Or now the FIA has clarified and said, you can't do this.
Yeah, it was never supposed to be allowed, but apparently there was a hole and they fixed it. There's been some people who've come out and said that isn't what was going on with Red Bull, and it was actually more like they'd found that somebody was about to do it or asked about it, and they decided to preemptively close it. But nonetheless, there's something going on, and I'm going to go with suspension. But brakes, I could totally believe that a relationship between asymmetric braking and suspension can have an impact like this.
Absolutely. I think the biggest question is, because last year we were talking a lot about Red Bull's only setting up the car for the race. They don't need to worry about qualifying, and Max can put it on pole. And I tried to look back at Zandvoort last year, which is a little bit off the map. because it was a very wet race and things like that. But I'm almost wondering, should they bring last year's car and just set it up for qualifying?
That's what I think they should do. I think that's what they need to do, the reference of that. And I know there's like FIA regulations that make it difficult, but at this point, like Max has still got enough of a lead that if you brought the other car and then you drove it around in FP1 and then you drove the new car in FP2 on the same settings, right?
Yeah.
And go do the comparison, because it's the only place you can bring last year's car is to an FP session and just accept that you're going to waste it. I feel like they need to do that, but maybe this is me and my obsession with information, because if I have information, then I can make decisions. But at the moment, they don't have the information. Or their suspension engineer got fired, one of the two.
Or make Checo run last year's car.
But Checo's not consistent enough, and he's not predictable enough, and he drives differently to Max, that I don't think he gives you the benchmark.
I agree, but I also disagree that because essentially Max's championship is hanging on by a thread right now. We'll talk about that. That if you're going to nuke somebody in a free practice session, don't nuke Max. Let Max and GP focus on setting up that car, exactly what they need to do with Battle Lando, and use Checo, who you're already probably going to ditch at the end of the season, as the testing mule of like, okay, here is last year's Abu Dhabi car that was dominant. I wouldn't do this. Oh, and here's the weird thing is you got like a bunch of weird tracks until the US Grand Prix. So really that's the first time you can do this where you're on a regular track. And even then you have some, like the whole back half of the season is some weird tracks where weird things can happen.
So here's the thing. Let's say they did that and they had some massive insight.
Yeah.
What do they do with it? What when you've got that information, are you basically saying this is really for next year because you can't do anything for the rest of the season because there's no time and there's no money in the rest of this budget cap?
Well, I think the answer is like if last year's car is faster than this year's car, you just run last year's car. You don't even worry about the upgrades. Just go run last year's car.
True.
Because they were so far. Because if you can set it up, because we know what Max can do with a car, and we know this car is not stable. That if you set up that car in a more qualified setup, maybe Max can deal with it better. But this also goes to now they're nowhere on tire wear as well. So I think you're spot on. It's not the floor, it's the suspension.
Yeah. Which says a lot, because I think that's a problem for a lot of teams, including Ferrari.
Well, it was a problem with Mercedes, and now, with the exception of this race, which they kind of knew they weren't going to be great at this race, Mercedes is looking a lot better.
Yeah, they took their problem. Speaking of qualifying,
we should talk about let's do that.
We should talk about the actual weekend.
Yeah, okay.
So for qualifying, wet weather kind of mixed it up a little bit. Maybe it didn't quite go random number generator. Screwed up free practice for a lot of people, but it made for a bit of an evolving track. So there was a bit of magic that happened, but nothing really exciting necessarily because of the weather. But McLaren is a rocket ship, is it not?
Yeah.
Man, he slapped in an absolute stormer. That lap that he put in for pole was a proper good lap. That was what, 3-4 tenths faster than Max?
I think 5.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. What happened to the half a second advantage of being at your home race?
I think this is one of those, the McLaren is definitely the fastest car right now, but this also feels more like when everybody was like, oh, we should nuke the Red Bull because it's so much faster. It's no, everybody else has screwed up their cars, now including Red Bull, and just McLaren has screwed up their car the least.
It's so interesting. I keep trying to balance did McLaren get better or did Red Bull get worse? And normally I'm like a bit binary, but this feels like McLaren got better and Red Bull screwed up.
I think if Red Bull was on a natural development pace, I think we could definitely say McLaren got better. I think if anything, with how we're seeing that Red Bull car drive now, I think they did objectively get worse. And yeah, McLaren definitely got better because like we're seeing the times come down and things like McLaren definitely got better, but like the whole grid always gets better. But in this case, like I think Red Bull, instead of like not even just treading water, is actively starting to drown.
It's like Ferrari until this race where they were clearly going backwards. It's
they're always good for one driver on a podium.
The question is, which one do you get? Speaking of qualifying performance of Max Verstappen, it just basically looked like he couldn't hook it up. Like it just didn't. He wasn't on the pace all weekend. He wasn't top in any of them. Not that the F3 practices were indicative because they're free practice and they were wet. But he had to dig deep, I think, for his P2. I think he had to really put his foot down. But
I think this just goes once again to Red Bull are insanely lucky they have Max Verstappen in that car.
Oh yeah, if they had Danny Rick and Sergio Perez. I wonder if equally true what would have happened if they'd had Seb Vettel in it. So.
Yeah.
Lewis forgot how to drive. Or was he sabotaged? Do we think it was sabotage? Do we think he's forgotten how to drive in qualifying? Do we think it was just not his weekend?
I think it just wasn't his weekend. I think Mercedes said they were going to have problems with Zandvoort, and as much as Lewis can be on it, Lewis can also be very checked out, especially this season.
Yeah, did you see the post-qualifying interview where they were asking, somebody interviewed him and was like, so, you know, you're starting down the back, what do you think you can make up for it this weekend? Do you think you can recover? He's like, no, I'm done.
Yeah.
But without getting into the race performance, he kind of turned it around. So
he did.
Aston Martin somehow made it into Q3, which I thought was a pretty good showing. Not so much in the race, but I was surprised with the Aston Martin. I wonder if Aston Martin were one of the beneficiaries of the slight minimal random number generator.
Possibly. Zandvoort's a bit of a weird track. Seriously, the back half of the season is all the weird tracks. Like Zandvoort's weird,
but fun.
Yes, and to some extent, Monza's also weird because
it is. It's very exceptionally weird and fast.
Yeah. Baku is 90-degree corners, a crazy castle section, and then a straightaway. It's weird. Singapore is nothing but 90-degree corners and not even a straightaway.
Yep.
The U.S. Grand Prix is about the only normal one. Mexico City's at altitude, which makes it weird, and a very, very long straight. Interlagos is just... Oh, it's a great track, but that is a random number generator of a track, or it can be. There are so many ways to go fast around that track. The weather is always an issue. It's also somewhat at altitude that, like, Interlagos can just be crazy. Vegas last year was just anything of what it was.
Yeah. So we only have one data point, so we can't draw a line yet.
Right, but but Vegas is also just somewhat weird. If it's similar to what it was last year with like no grip until it suddenly has grip and then doesn't have grip, like, yeah, that's a weird track. Qatar is just Bahrain if somebody forgot how to draw Bahrain. And then Abu Dhabi is what it is. Like, it's a hotel that then had a track built around it. Like,
yes, that's the best way to say it.
Like, so yeah, so like the nine back or last 10 races of the season are really just like, there's, I'd say two normal racetracks on it, and that would be US and Qatar.
Why do you say Abu Dhabi's not a normal racetrack? It's very boring, but it's nothing unique about it.
Oh, it just because it ends up being boring because it's built around a hotel.
Yeah, okay.
Because essentially they compromise the track to build the hotel, and so you don't actually have a good racetrack, you have a good hotel. But other than that, I guess it is a standard Tilka track.
Yeah. Last bit of qualifying, Williams did great until they got disqualified because they can't use a ruler. But actually, Albon got it into Q3 and in a really reasonable place. I thought, given that they brought a boatload of upgrades, a new floor, new inlets, new something else's, and another wood shit and doohickey, I thought there's a lot of hope in that car if they can fix the 3mm and not ruin the car's performance.
Yeah, I gotta hope they can fix it. Well, and that they don't have to replace another chassis from Logan.
Oh, Jesus Christ, that man needs a car. Apparently the floor was okay.
Well, the chassis is more the problem.
Yeah. Shall we go? It's not the chassis. It's the rider.
Well, if everything burns down, I think it's really a problem.
It is
because it was on fire.
It was on fire, but apparently the floor's okay. It's okay.
The one that's 3mm too wide is okay.
Yeah, apparently so. But you just get out the sandpaper. It's fine. Shall we cover the race? This dynamic, exciting, topsy-turvy, round the corner, up and down, banking left and right, front, back, overtaking, undertaking, round the taking, everybody taking something. Should we talk about this race?
I do like the track. I think it's a very cool track. I like the banks. I like the corners. But I don't know, this race just felt unexciting.
Yes. There was no jeopardy is maybe the right way of saying it.
It could have used a safety car.
Could have used a safety car.
Or some rain coming in from the North Sea.
Yet some rain. I do think a big part of what makes this track not as exciting as it should be is because the cars are too big. Too wide, really.
Sure. But Lando got pole, and then Max came through for the lead off the start because Lando, or both McLarens, really had a terrible start.
Yeah, very strange. They need to fix that.
And then they don't know who they're racing, apparently.
Because they had to ask and make sure that, I think that was a secret coded message to tell Lando that not to race Piastri if he ends up with him.
Right. One of my takeaways from this race was that I really think Ferrari Plan A is always a one stop and Ferrari Plan B is always a two stop. Because
I will subscribe to that.
Because like we made the thing of like they actually never change what their plans are, and that's why you hear sometimes like, oh, let's go Plan E, and it's just they're always the same plans because this is a situation where Ferrari was kind of in weird positions. It would be good to try something bold, and they were just straight on Plan A, and it's like you've been in much weirder or better spots already going for Plan B or Plan C. So I just really think at this point Ferrari just has one set of plans, and instead of changing them week to week, we're just going to all memorize what the plans are. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's why you end up with Plan E sometimes. So yeah, Plan E, that we're only going to run that once a year, but that's,
We have defined it at the beginning of the season. You know how we're going to find this out for truth is when Lewis writes his book, when he writes his memoir, because he's going to go to Ferrari and he can put it in the book.
Sure. I still, at this point we're going to need like section. He should just do it in parts of like Lewis, the first edition or the first chapters or the first edition is going to be the McLaren years.
Yes.
And then we'll get another edition that's the Mercedes years.
Through to 2021.
Yes. And then we'll get the later Mercedes years and then and possibly with the Ferrari years, depending how long he stays in. The twilight of his career.
Correct.
And really, we should just actually have like the start be 2007. And it's written by both Lewis and Fernando. And I've said this before and I still want to see it. We have Fernando's account on the left page and Lewis's account on the right page. And you can like go through of like, here's what happened.
So I've been continuing to make my way through the old highlights and we made it through 2007. And man, I don't know how much of this is how they cut it. But Fernando really looks like it was his fault that he lost that year. It's like in hindsight, you watch it and you're like, no, Fernando, you did yourself a dirt. If you had decided to just accept that Lewis was a worthy competitor and just drive your heart out by on the track and being a good team player, Fernando would have won in 2007.
If I was a bajillionaire, I would actually because obviously I own a publishing company if I'm a bajillionaire. I would literally reach out to both of the representatives and be like, how much money would it take for this book to happen?
Yes.
Of like the Fernando side and the Lewis side.
For our listeners, should we start a GoFundMe to buy a publishing house so that we can make this happen?
Oh, no, we need more money than a publishing house has.
No, that's what I'm saying. The GoFundMe needs to provide us with, a couple of $1 billion.
Oh, yeah.
Which we'll then use to buy the publishing company. And then we will use the loans that we'll take out in the publishing company against the book to pay them like $300 million each. Or whatever it is. And we'll bankrupt the publishing company, but we'll get the book.
If everybody who listens to this podcast gives us $1 billion, we'll have the ability to do this.
You know what we'll do? We'll make it like the Wu-Tang Clan album.
There's
only one
There's
copy.
only one, yeah.
We'll get to read it, and then we'll put it in a thing, and then we'll sell it off, and that will pay off the debts. So I got it. Okay. Anyway, back to racing. So McLaren did some stuff, and
they did a Ferrari. Okay. They forgot they had a second car.
Yeah, that seems par for the course. That was not unexpected. And credit to Charlie Boy, who used the words, direct quote, "We had the right strategy today." From a Ferrari driver, I can't believe it. I'm unwilling to accept it.
They kind
Plan
of
A worked.
They kind of did.
Yeah, it was great.
Mercedes pitted George when they shouldn't have to just truly ensue that the Mercedes finished next to each other.
I sat down and by like lap 15 when Lewis was going like great guns and overtaking everybody, good job to him, I said to my better half, I said Lewis is going to push and extend and stop at the same time as the mediums and go to hard. And then within like 5 laps of being on the hard and seeing the performance in that, and I'm like, he's going to two-stop and he's going to go for softs at the end. And I was vindicated. And it made sense. And they played that strategy right. And it was worth the risk and it made sense. But stopping George, I don't know what they were thinking. It made no sense. It was ridiculous. It's because they want to make sure he knows what pain is so that when they give everything to Kimi next year, because Kimi's the best one, Kimi gets to go straight into the Mercedes car. George had to pay his dues for 3 years in a tractor.
Well, to be fair, with how that Mercedes was looking for some of the year, Kimi would also be paying his dues.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
And we don't know what's going to happen in 26.
No,
there's a rule change coming that they might be both paying dues again for a while. We'll see.
Or it could be amazing.
The one last note I had on the race was: did you hear the post race radio to Max Verstappen with GP and Christian Horner?
I did not.
I have never heard those two sound so defeated. like it was like, yeah, well done, Max. You did about as well as we thought we were going to be able to do. Good job. Bring it home. Yeah, guys, I agree. Like, that's about as best as we thought we were going to do.
Max was so... I mean, I know he got a lot of crap for... Where was it? It was Austria where he was cranky on the radio and being a bit of a tool. And I kind of feel like it was... He felt that was a moment when they could have just done better because obviously they've been so successful in the past. It was just we screwed up this one race. I feel like since then, the performance of the car, he's just accepted it. It's just like, yeah, that's what the car's going to do because it's crap.
You know, in some ways, Red Bull is very, very lucky that Max isn't somebody like Fernando Alonso or an extent Lewis Hamilton. Because, like, while Max, I think, loves driving a Formula One car, he doesn't need it. And so he's, like, even in the post-race interviews, you know, it would have been very easy for, I think if it was another driver who was all in on Formula One, had a great car at the beginning of the season, and now has maybe the third or fourth best car, like... He'd be like all sorts of, oh, this is terrible. Oh, we needed it. But he was like, yeah, it was fine. It's about as best as we thought we were going to do. Pulled off a second in front of the home crowd. Hi, everybody. You know, I think it was just this case of that they're extremely lucky that Max is just like, yeah, I'm going to show up every weekend and drive as fast as I can because I love doing it. But he's not. He's as checked in or checked out as he's going to be. You just get what you get with Max, and you know he has fun doing like the virtual racing and some of the other stuff going on
And a new chapter in his life with Kelly, supposedly.
Oh, that was in between race drama we didn't talk about at all. Yeah.
It's because we have no data. We have an Instagram post.
We don't know if they're soft launching separation. We don't know if they're soft launching a kid. We don't know if they're soft launching marriage. It could be all over. We don't even know if it's related to Max.
Indeed. It could be anything and all of the above.
All right, let's move on. Dominic, who was your driver of the day?
Or the driver who couldn't wait for the day to be open. I think Carlos gets driver of the day.
I think he see that.
I think he did a great drive after he screwed up qualifying. He did a great drive coming through, knowing when to do it, using his tires, getting it. What was he in the end? Fifth, fourth?
Yeah, fifth.
That's pretty good. Pretty good. I think that's credit for him. My driver who couldn't wait for the day to be over was Logan because it knows it's his last drive and it was terrible. Also with a side helping of Guan Yu Zhou because he was also terrible. I feel bad for him because his first two seasons pretty reasonable, but now he's just down the back and he should give up.
The only reason I'd push back on Logan is because if he knows this is his last day in a Formula One car, he'd want it to last as long as he could so he could still be a Formula One driver. But I would say Williams wanted it to be over as quickly as he could.
Yes, because they're desperately hoping he doesn't bend yet another car.
Right. For me, my driver of the day was Lewis Hamilton. I mean, he had the pace all day. He was coming through the field. You know, one of the things that they were talking about early in the race, like even with the field spread, like he was still on the pace of the leaders. So, you know, I have a lot of hope for Lewis down the back half of the season. That comes to my spicy takes and rumors section. But yeah, I thought Lewis had a great day, great drive, and I'm trying not to just give this to the winner because that's the thing that annoys me about the F1 vote is how Max can get a fastest lap, win the race by being dominant and not be driver of the day, and Lando does it, and he is driver of the day. So
underdog versus overdog.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Lando's the underdog right now.
But everybody thinks that Max is the overdog.
Fair enough. And my driver who just really wanted to go home, Max, I think for the most part, because home was very close this weekend for him, and the Red Bull just has no mojo right now.
I was surprised to learn that he wasn't staying in a house that he owns in the Netherlands. He was staying in a motorhome because he got pee tested at 7 o'clock on Friday morning and was woken up and was very confused and then had to wait for an hour because he wasn't ready to pee. And he said they came to my motorhome, which I thought was interesting. Anyway, fun fact of reading the internet for too much.
All right. Do you have any fun takes and rumors?
I do. And it's about the safety car because you think maybe I've got one other one in here, but my one is that safety car is not happening because drivers aren't trying. They're either tired because they've been racing for too long, like it's a long season, and at a certain point you just don't have you can't roll yourself into trying hard, and that they're just not trying. Like, I don't mean that necessarily in these lazy drivers, but like it feels like safety cars, and no, it wasn't just no safety car, no yellow flags in the entire race this weekend.
I'll subscribe to that, but I'm going to say a different reason.
Okay.
I'm going to say the cost cap and the how many engines were the engine allotment, because with the cost cap, if I bin it, that's maybe money that has to go to replacing the car and not an upgrade that I want in the future.
Yes.
And because you're only allowed a certain amount of power unit parts per season and gear parts per season, like, I'm also not incentivized to push really hard to maybe the engine will explode, because then I've lost one in my pool and I'm doing a grid penalty for the rest of the season. I think these are like the unintended consequences you get with some of these things.
I can imagine that the Thursday morning briefing that they do before everybody rolls out and starts doing everything is like, all right, peeps, this weekend, pretty graph, cost cap, where we are relative to it. And it's like, please don't bend it. And therefore they get the message, and they understand intrinsically what bending it would mean to the team and how it would impact their performance. I can totally subscribe to that.
The only way to carve that out is like you have a certain amount of like damage you're allowed to do that is not counted against the cost cap.
Yes. My other spicy take is Red Bull have sabotaged Max by giving him the old floor. Why would you choose to sabotage Max? Because they are fed up, and Horner is fed up of answering the questions about Checo's performance. So they give Checo the brand new floor, so he performed better, relatively speaking, and looks closer to Max. And then they chose to do this, and Max got the old one because they think maybe he can pull it out, but it lets Checo look a bit closer. Sabotage, that's what they do.
Yeah, they need to work on their sabotaging if that is truly what it is. So my takes are going to be pretty much it's all about Max winning the title. I'm saying if Max does win the title, it'll be because of Lewis and Mercedes specifically.
You're going to have to explain that one, because I think I'm not understanding the mathematics.
Because when we get to it, because I have a new section called Championship Watch, but essentially the best, because I think at this point in time that Red Bull is not a good enough car to beat the McLaren. The only way Max wins the championship right now is if somebody else can beat the McLaren. And we got Monza coming up, and the Mercedes looked really good in some races before the summer break. And I think Monza is going to be a track that suits them and the Ferraris. And I think the McLaren will still look good, but if you can put kind of moving forward into like a championship watch, Lando needs 7.7 points on Max every weekend for the rest of the way out. The gap between first place and second place is 7 points in a given championship. Second to third is 3. So if somebody else wins or somebody else gets up there, even if Lando and Max are right next to each other, like that takes away how many points Lando can pull off of Max in a weekend.
Yeah. Okay,
so
that makes sense.
If Max wins the title, it's going to be because of Mercedes and Lewis being able to get up there and take points off McLaren. And if Max doesn't win the title, it'll be because Checo has been kept in the Red Bull for too long, because this goes back to the whole thing of there were several races early in the season. Like, there's not too many where there's actually Checo did a pretty decent job at the very start of the season of getting second, but there was enough other opportunities in there where either Max won and Checo should have been a lot closer to get a second or a third, or he could have at least acted as a rear gunner to help do some offsetting strategies, things like that, to force McLaren to do something else. Because honestly, McLaren's strategy is kind of
yeah, they need to work on that. That muscle needs to happen. That's what they need to spend the winter break over the Christmas period.
They need to start acting like winners and not
correct
hopium.
Correct.
So it'll be if Max wins the title, it'll be because of Mercedes, and if Max loses the title, it'll be because of Red Bull.
Man, I'd love it to be. Because I'm not a Lando booster at the moment. I would love Lewis to steal the championship from Lando by driving better than Lando.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Great. Do you want to talk about the Constructors' Championship?
It's weird to say it's over when the second place team is still trailing the first place team, but they're only 30 points behind, and they only need to outscore Red Bull 4 points a weekend, which, given the performance of Checo Perez compared to Oscar and Lando, like, I think it's done.
That's 2 weekends. That's nothing. And in 10 races, that's 9 races. That's easy.
2 weekends. That might be depending on. It might be 1 weekend depending on the day.
Is Monza a sprint? Because if it's a sprint, then boom, wham, bam, thank you, man.
It's not, but like at a track like Monza, which can sometimes be difficult to pass on because it turns into a stope streaming affair. If Checo has a bad qualifying and ends up out of the points, it could be done.
Yep. I totally agree. I think it is going to be McLaren's Constructors' Championship. I think we're going to get a split driver Constructor Championship this year.
I think so. Going to the drivers, there's 70 points currently between Max and Lando. If Lando wins every race from here on out and Max gets second the rest of the way, that would mean Max, and that I'm including sprints, that would mean Max wins the championship by 4 points. There are 3 sprint races left. They are US, Brazil, and Qatar. Hey, those 3 are like all in order too. That's interesting. Yeah, so that'll be... Oh, there's Mexico in there, so never mind. So there's 3 sprints left. So, and the gap between first and second in the sprints is only 1 point. So Lando will still be 4 points short. That is 4 fastest laps. What happens if they're tied on points? Do we go to like first place countbacks or something?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I think, well, if Lando wins out, I think Lando would have it. But yeah, so it's going to be, it could come down to setting fastest laps. And then at what point do you start pitting Checo to always take the fastest lap point so Lando doesn't get it?
And how many times do you pit Oscar to steal it from Checo if Checo's taking it?
Well, it doesn't matter because like as long as Lando doesn't get it, like
yes.
Like,
or equally true if Max has a fastest lap on something else. Like, do you, because you don't know the variability of what might happen in the future, you start pitting Piastri and saying you're going to go and get a 10th because you're going to take the fastest lap.
Yeah, and I think if they're comfortable in the constructors, I don't think McLaren is going to be smart enough to do that.
Yeah.
Because if we look back to like Hungary, but you look back to Hungary and suddenly those 7 points could make a massive difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
They made the wrong call. Predictions for the other Italian Grand Prix?
Oh yeah, we had Imola. You just said Kimi?
I think Kimi Antonelli is going to be all over it. I think we're going to announce him. I think he's going to barnstorm FP1. He's going to make George look stupid, and everybody's going to be like, it's just FP1. And everybody's going to be like, finally, this is the second coming of Jesus Christ. I think that's what's going to happen.
So you think Monza's going to be all about a Friday then?
Yes, I think that's the news that will come out of it. I think
Kimi is Italian, right?
He is Italian. That's why it's going to be all over and everything.
They're just trying to win back the Italian fans, those Mercedes people.
It's not going to work. The Italians will have Lewis, who's just going to be such a great person.
Can they cheer for a Brit? Well, I guess they cheered for a German.
Exactly.
Well, there's more historical allies between the Italians and the Germans than the Italians and the Brits.
True. That is very true. I can't remember whether I wrote this or you wrote this. Merck and Ferrari on the podium.
I wrote that.
Oh, you wrote that. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was going to take the opposite and say I'm pretty sure Ferrari's going to try really hard and the engine's going to go pop.
Yes, but remember, they forget they have 2 cars, so one will go pop and one will get on the podium.
Very good point. It's just a question of which one did they forget this weekend?
Well, they're going to prioritize Charles because they love Charles, and Charles is their long-term driver. Charles will bin it because he's still Charles, and Carlos will go on to claim Ferrari glory.
I like it.
I'm not writing that down because we screwed ourselves so much with the Zandvoort predictions that I'm not putting that on paper.
Okay, because you need to leave a little bit of opportunity.
Yeah.
So if you're going to put Merck on the podium, which Merck are you putting on the podium?
Oscar. Because Monza's not as... Wait.
I said Merck.
Oh, Merck, sorry. I heard Macca.
I thought there was a whole deep prediction that Oscar was going to switch teams midweek.
Yeah, they're done with George. My heart wants Lewis. Yep.
But you'll take any of them?
Yeah. I think Lewis would be great because he gives the Tifosi like something to get excited about.
Yes. And maybe he can sign some Ferrari caps.
And then my second prediction is Haas can't race Monza because their cars are in lockdown in the Netherlands.
So immediately before coming to record this podcast...
Also something we didn't talk about in between race drama.
Yes. Maybe we should back up a little bit before I talk about the news. So, if we all cast our mind back to 2022... I think it was. There was a certain incident which involved a couple of countries, one specifically invading another, but that meant that one of the drivers, who was Russian, was no longer allowed to drive because he was doing some stuff and it's bad, and that Haas team kicked him out and kicked out the sponsors, who were also Russian, and said, screw you. The sponsor believes that Haas owes them money because they had given it to them and they wanted it back because they weren't getting a full season. And this reached a crescendo on Friday where a Dutch court said that bailiffs were entitled to come take stuff from Haas to cover the $9 million sponsorship money they were supposed to be handing back, to the point that the bailiffs came to the track and did an evaluation, and the Dutch government said that you can't leave the country until you've paid that debt. And what happened since then? Well, what happened since then is there was a claim that Haas has in fact paid the Russian people, whose name I've forgotten. But the last bit of news was that they were still being embargoed from leaving the country until confirmation had reached the Dutch courts that they had in fact paid it, which suggests to me that maybe they hadn't paid it, or the wire transfer accidentally ended up in some other Russian oligarch's bank account, and it's all going to look a bit suspicious.
Fair enough. But yeah, so, do you think Haas is going to be racing at Monza?
I think there's a good chance they might not be. Because $9 million is a lot of money for Gene Haas.
Yeah, and you know he's not going to give it willingly.
No, exactly. So, after all the spicy predictions of this long break, remember we are always waiting for your feedback. Write into feedback@tinfoilhelmets.com and let us know your conspiracies, feedback, and wants, and also how much you're willing to donate to our GoFundMe to purchase a publishing house to get the F1 memoir written. Also, remember to tell your friends to like, listen, rate, and subscribe to the greatest podcast called Tinfoil Helmets.